This video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you need a website or domain, head over to squarespace.com for an all-in-one solution. Hey everybody, and welcome back to a new video. Are you considering getting a mirrorless camera, or have recently gotten one and are wondering how they work and how to best take advantage of their features? In this video, I'll show you how modern mirrorless cameras work, and more importantly, how to get every ounce of performance from them, so you can get on with taking amazing photos. Don't miss my bonus tip, where I'll show you the technique to ditch your tripod and use your mirrorless camera to get a shot like this 3-second exposure handheld. My name is Simon D'Entremont, and I'm a professional nature and wildlife photographer living in Eastern Canada. I make weekly videos giving you photo tips or taking you behind the scenes for nature photography. Subscribe if you want to see more. Mirrorless cameras have steadily been increasing in popularity and market share in recent years and will likely replace most DSLRs over the next few years as this transition continues. There are good reasons for this. They have benefits inherent in their design that open up new technology and user interface opportunities that people really like. Let me quickly show you how a mirrorless camera works and yet differs from a DSLR, so my advice later makes more sense. On a DSLR, the image seen in the viewfinder is the actual scene which the camera is pointed at, with the photons being sent up to your eye via a prism and mirror assembly which redirects the light. But this mirror assembly in front of the sensor needs to flip out of the way to take a picture. So when you hit the shutter, the mirror flips up and down. In a mirrorless camera, as the name itself implies, there's no mirror and mirror box assembly. Instead, your viewfinder is actually a little LCD screen, and it shows you what the sensor sees by projecting it in your viewfinder like a little TV. Another difference is that on a DSLR, the focusing is done by redirecting a small amount of the image light to a small focusing chip, which is calibrated to know when the image is out of focus and sends commands to the camera to adjust focus until the image is in focus. The weakness of this system is that if the calibration is off, the focus may be off also. Mirrorless cameras, on the other hand, use the sensor data itself to know if the image is in focus. As such, there's no issue for miscalibration. If the sensor data says it's in focus, it's in focus. So now let's dive into mirrorless features and how to get the best of them. One area where mirrorless cameras are really making great strides are in autofocus capability. Many cameras are using hybrids of two different types of autofocus. One is phase detect, where two parts of the image are compared for focus, and the camera's job is to bring these two phases together until they match. Another type of autofocus is contrast-based, where the camera does the same thing as you would when you're manually focusing a lens to a fine point. You'd manually rack the lens back and forth until you had it just right. Having two choices for autofocus, or even using both together at the same time, is giving mirrorless camera designers flexibility to use what will deliver the best results. One area where these benefits are really paying dividends are in how the focus points cover the sensor and the field of view. Many modern mirrorless cameras have autofocus coverage of 90% or more of the field of view, where DSLRs were often limited to the center of the field of view. This allows mirrorless cameras to focus on the subject right to the edge of the sensor, allowing compositions that used to require a technique called focus and recompose, where you locked onto your subject with a shutter half press and then recompose the photo to put the subject outside the DSLR focus points. With mirrorless cameras, this is no longer required, and you can actually place and focus on your subject very close to the edge of the frame, allowing for many more opportunities for composition. Now, one weakness of the contrast-based focus system popular in mirrorless cameras is getting stuck on a distant background and not finding subjects close to you because they're so close and so out of focus. One trick is to pre-focus close to you before some action happens, as going from close to far is much easier for mirrorless cameras than from far to close. Another tip is to use the focus limiter on your lens and set to the near setting when you're confident the action will be close, such as shooting family or portrait photos. I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. If you don't know who Squarespace is, they help people build their own websites with great website building tools, and they offer an all-in-one solution. I used Squarespace to build my own website, and it was easy. Using Squarespace, you can build your own online store, and you can sell both digital and physical products, great for photographers looking to start or grow their own business. You can accept credit card payments and PayPal payments easily, even from international clients. And you can even set up password-protected areas to your site to share content with only certain people or special clients. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Simon to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Another feature that's really been popularized in mirrorless cameras is eye auto detect, which finds the eyes of subjects and locks focus onto those. This has been a huge win for portrait and wildlife photographers, where 95 or 99% of the time, getting the eye in focus is what's critical. Make sure you use the right setting for animals versus people, as using the wrong setting in the wrong subject does affect performance. Don't ask how I know this. My experience is that while eye detection works great most of the time through heavy brush, a fence, a busy scene, or where your subject isn't facing you, it may take a while to lock on. But there's a workaround. One technique which I use is to program a back button which turns on traditional focus points. That way, I point a single focus point through a fence or brush until it focuses on my subject. Then I switch to eye detect, and bang, it locks onto my subject. One of the most important features of mirrorless cameras is the ability to show you a live exposure preview via the electronic viewfinder. DSLR design was such that it showed you the scene as real light and real photons. While this had a very natural quality to it, it didn't compensate for your camera settings. To see what the final image would look like, you needed to take the picture first. Mirrorless cameras, on the other hand, show you a preview of what your photo will look like, a huge advantage. This allows you to adjust the exposure while looking in the viewfinder until it gets to where you want it. A tip to take advantage of this is to turn on any features that show you the exposure levels or overexposure in the viewfinder. This includes the histogram so that you can monitor your exposure, or blinkies, which are also known as highlight alerts, for blown out areas. You can also turn on zebras if your EVF supports them, like on many Sony cameras. These are lines going through your image that can be set to show at varying levels of exposure, showing you areas that are brighter than a value that you set. These have been used in video for some time and are now working their way into photography. One of the other great features of mirrorless cameras is to shoot completely silently using what's called the electronic shutter. What this means is that instead of a mechanical shutter which flips up and down in front of your sensor to capture light in a specific amount of time, known as the shutter speed, the camera just reads the information from the sensor electronically. The benefit here is that the camera then operates totally silently. A wedding ceremony, a quiet chess match, a golf tournament, or photographing skittish wildlife are all potential use cases. Just turn the camera setting to electronic shutter to enable this. Know that you can get some artifacts with quickly moving objects called rolling shutter, or with flashes, so investigate these before using it for important work in these use cases. Another of the great features of mirrorless cameras is the ability to take fast bursts of photos, in part because of the lack of a mirror assembly that needs to go up and down, coupled with faster and faster processors that can handle the data transfer rates needed to write all this information to your memory cards. Many high-end mirrorless cameras can now shoot 20 or 30 frames per second, and my Canon R8 can do 40. Now, sometimes these come with limitations in autofocus, formats available, and bit depth. While these are more photos than most of us would shoot on any daily shoot, and even with the limitations stated earlier, these can come in handy in specific circumstances where capturing the perfect moment is what you want, like a baseball making contact with the bat. I use it to shoot fast action when I know something will happen, like a bird flipping food or taking off from a perch. To get the best of these burst modes, you're often going to be using them on moving targets. If so, make sure your autofocus is set to continuous autofocus, which tracks moving subjects and not on one shot, which freezes the focus plane at one spot. Also, when you're expecting some fast action, leave more room in the field of view in front of your subject to leave some room for your subject to move into if they move quickly. Although not unique to mirrorless cameras, sensor stabilization, or in-body image stabilization, IBIS as it's usually called, has really been popularized with recent generation mirrorless cameras. This is where, similar to lens stabilization, the sensor can move around to compensate for camera shake and movement, stilling the image and allowing for sharper photos at lower shutter speeds. While for genres that mainly use tripods, this may be less critical during normal use. Some formerly tripod-mounted shots can now be done handheld. And for genres that usually handhold, sharp images at slower and slower shutter speeds can now be achieved. Make note that sensor stabilization doesn't help with subject movement, just camera movement. If you want to freeze subject movement, higher shutter speeds and good panning technique are what you want to use. But I promised you a bonus step, and that's how to squeeze the most out of your stabilized sensor. While it can work well without any extra user input, a bit of technique will allow for crazy long exposures, handheld. First, using a wider lens helps as it has less effective magnification. More magnification introduces more movement in the field of view, so a 17mm lens will have less movement than a 40mm lens. Second, supporting your lens well is important. If you're trying out for really long exposures, don't hold your camera out this way. Instead, use the best practice technique of supporting the lens from underneath and putting your elbows against your chest. This really helps stabilize any movement. The next issue is your body swaying during a long exposure. Lean up against something to stop moving left and right or forward and backward during the exposure. Also, an adjustment to my past advice for sharp photos, which usually includes putting lots of pressure on the back eye cup with your eyebrow. While this is great for sharpness for fast exposures, long lenses, and teleconverters, with really long exposures, I find this introduces shake. In this case, a light grip on the camera and your eyebrow gently against the eye cup is the best technique. And finally, last but maybe most importantly, don't stab the shutter button on a long exposure. Give it a super gentle press where it's almost a surprise to you if it went off, and hold your breath for the exposure. Using the electronic shutter can also help by taking shutter vibration out of the equation. Here you go, here's an exposure with my Canon R6 and 17-40 lens at 17mm of 3 seconds. Let's have a little fun and try to get your own personal best. Use your own setup and let us know how long an exposure you were able to get with an acceptably sharp result, and post the results and the gear you used in the comments below. If you're thinking of moving from a DSLR to mirrorless and want a bit more insight as to the transition and differences, check out my video on that, which you can see right here. If this video is deserving, give it a like and YouTube will show it to even more people, helping another photographer grow in this hobby and take their own amazing photos. I know you can do it.